We call this hearing to order and thank my colleague, Chairman Chris Smith, for agreeing to hold this hearing jointly between the Oversight and Investigations Subcommittee and his African Global Health and Human Rights Subcommittee. Also want to thank ranking members, Congressman Russ Carnahan, Congresswoman Karen Bass. The Chinese Communist Party is a corrupt elite which aggressively claims territory in the South China Sea, pilfers U.S. intellectual property, steals American jobs, and conducts massive espionage against our government and private enterprises. The CCP spends a vast amount of its time, energy, and resources maintaining its grip on power by suppressing the rights of the Chinese people, ethnic groups such as the Tibetans, the Uyghurs, and yes, religious practitioners, and anyone who speaks up against the party's grip on power. The CCP and its state security machine uses a wide range of repression techniques, including not only limited to censorship, beatings, home imprisonment, forced labor camps, those labor camps called the Logai, of course, and the most ghoulish manifestation of this gangsterism is the forced harvesting of organs of the political prisoners and religious followers that it arrests, particularly of the Chinese religious movement known as the Falun Gong. Last year, the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom found in their annual report that the Communist Party of China maintains an extrajudicial security apparatus called the 610 Office to persecute Falun Gong believers. It is estimated that over half of the 300,000 believed in the Logai prisons are inmates who happen to be part of the Falun Gong. Since the CCP began its crackdown in 1999 and began to call the peaceful practice of the Falun Gong an evil cult, thousands have been killed and their organs ripped out of their body while they were still warm and transplanted into the bodies of rich Chinese and foreign accomplices. Members of the CCP do this in order to make themselves and their children rich, and because the Falun Gong was and remains a peaceful and indigenous movement which attracts tens of millions of followers in China. The CCP cannot allow any independent group in China to exist which can motivate so many people. Any group the CCP does not control is a threat and must be penetrated, subverted, and destroyed. The Falun Gong has remained peaceful even in the face of unspeakable brutality. This unbridled obsession with destroying the Falun Gong unmasks the true nature of the CCP. I look forward to hearing the comments of our panelists. And with us today, we have Dr. Damon Noto, who is a spokesman for the organization Doctors Against Forced Organ Harvesting. He graduated from Mount Sinai Medical School and is currently an attending physician at Hackensack University Medical Center in New Jersey. Then we have Dr. Gabriel Danovitch, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, is a professor of medicine at the David Giffen School of Medicine at UCLA and medical director of the Kidney and Pancreas Transplant Program at the Ronald Reagan Medical Center and is an expert on organ transplant tissues. And then we have with us Dr. Charles Lee, who serves as the spokesman for the Global Center for Quitting the Chinese Communist Party. Sounds good to me. He was born in Communist China and lived through the Cultural Revolution. After 1989, he came to the United States. He is a Falun Gong practitioner, and when he traveled back to China in 2003, he was arrested at the airport and spent the next 3 years in a Chinese prison. This occurred despite the fact that he is a U.S. citizen. While in prison, he was tortured and forced to make products, some of which were later exported for profit to this country. Dr. Ethan Gutmann is an accomplished author and currently the Adjunct Fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. He has written extensively on China, including for the Weekly Standard, National Review, and for World Affairs Journal. He's also the author of a book, Losing the New China, a story of American commerce, desire, and betrayal. He earned his bachelor and master degrees in international affairs from Columbia University. I believe today's hearing is exceedingly important as we stand in moral witness to the ongoing crimes of the CCP and the possible accomplices that they have to these crimes right here in the United States. We now have Ms. Bass. Would you have an opening statement?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Chairman Rohrabacher and Smith, I want to thank you for holding this hearing, and I look forward to learning more about this horrific practice. I know that there's some differences in terms of the extent of this practice on the practitioners of Falun Gong, but, you know, I mean, to me, the idea that you would have forced harvesting of human organs regardless is just really deeply troubling. I know that the March 2012 Wall Street Journal article notes that China recently indicated that it plans to abolish the practice of death row inmate organ harvesting over the next 5 years. I don't know why we would do that over the next 5 years and not immediately. And I would also like to know, and perhaps it'll come out in the testimony, since this is a new issue to me, when they're harvesting these organs, who are they for, who do they go to? Are they exported around the world? Is this a profit-making business? You know, all of that kind of information I look forward to learning about from our witnesses, and thank you for taking the time out to come.
We also have with us Chris Smith, and let me just note that Chris and I have fought so many battles together over the years, and I've always been very proud that these type of stands, which, and let me just note, when you're a member of Congress, no matter what, there's going to be somebody else who's trying to get your job in the next election. And a lot of times members of Congress only want to tackle issues that are going to increase the number of contributions to their campaign war chest. Standing up for human rights does not increase the amount of money in your campaign war chest. Chris has been here all of these years and has been fighting the good fight, and it's an honor to have you here and co-chairing this hearing.
Well, Mr. Chairman, thank you for inviting our subcommittee, Ms. Bass and I, and members of the subcommittee to join you for this important hearing on the grave but little publicized human rights abuse occurring in China today and has been for many years, organ harvesting. And I want to say very clearly for the record how grateful I am for your leadership on human rights in China. Again, very often there are far too few people willing to speak not about the human rights abuses in China, but to do so with such clarity. And I think, as most of you know, as a former speechwriter for Ronald Reagan, Dana Rohrabacher knows how to phrase and how to cut right to the chase, and has done so with excellence since I have been here. So I want to thank you for that extraordinary leadership. That's true. What adjectives can be used to describe the Chinese doctors and hospitals engaging in large-scale harvesting of human organs for profit? The ordinary words like concerned, disturbing, appalling, or shocking are inadequate, yet our ordinary humanity shies away from words like barbaric. And in the absence of firm statistics, open waiting lists, transparency in the giving of consent, and even the number of Chinese who have been sentenced to death for condemned prisoners who are said to have been the largest number of organ donors, we can't know for sure, but we need to change that, and the inquiry has to begin in earnest. All that's been done years to date has set a very, very terrible record for the Chinese government's organ harvesting, but now we need to go and make this a premier human rights issue. I want to thank Dr. Charles Lee. He has been tenacious in trying to get the Congress to focus on this important issue, and so I thank him and I look forward to his testimony. I would note parenthetically that as far back as 1998, June 4th and June 16th, I chaired a hearing on the sale of body parts in the People's Republic of China, and we actually brought in a guard who brought in pictures. Harry Wu was one who arranged it, and he authenticated, and we had everything he said and everything he brought to us really raked over the coals to make sure it was accurate and there was absolutely no guile or mischief in his presentation. He sat right where you gentlemen sat and talked about how they would kill prisoners, mostly political and religious prisoners, but not execute them, but not kill them completely, take out the desired organs, and then finish the job of murdering that individual. And whatever was needed, kidneys, what is it that you need? They were able to put in the order, and then the wardens at various prisons would fill that order. The international transplant community, aware that their life-extending skills might be abused or might set in motion sales of organs by the poor or favor the rich, have over the years developed demanding protocols to assure that donations conform to strict ethical and procedural guidelines. The Chinese government says it is moving towards adherence to these standards. I'd say let's not hold our breath, let's trust, but verify. And in the absence of accurate information, can these assurances even be a little bit believed? All of this so far describes the ordinary transplant of such organs as kidneys, livers, lungs, hearts, and corneas, from those recently deceased to those who can use them. I am confident we will hear more from our witnesses about transplants in China and where that nation falls short of international standards and protocols. Mr. Chairman, reports from India, Malaysia, and Israel of their citizens who traveled to China for transplants that were botched, and the testimony of a few doctors and nurses now outside of China, give disturbing evidence that China has become a lawless zone, where medical skills are for sale for huge sums, where organs are said to come from prisoners. And again, we began documenting this back in 1998, and I'm sure it preceded even that, where high officials or transplant tourists with money need not wait for organs to become available because it's available because they execute a prisoner, where profit and power run over the law or medical ethics or pious pronouncements are made by the government that they're not doing this. So far, I have spoken of ordinary transplants, but there's a graver prospect. It is that the Chinese military doctors may be engaged in organ harvesting from living prisoners in Chinese camps and prisons. The charge is that many victims are ethnic minorities, and as Mr. Rohrabacher pointed out, members of the Falun Gong, members of the spiritual movement, unjustly held, abused, subjected to psychological and physical torture for nothing more than fidelity to truthfulness, compassion, and forbearance. This possibility pushes, and this probability pushes us into the horrific beyond, the beyond that challenges our language, making barbaric too calm of a word. If this is true, even the powerful fraught legal team, crimes against humanity, a term I should say, seems inadequate, least of horror. For those who doubt that horror could be sanctioned by a modern state, I commend the recent article by one of today's witnesses, Ethan Gutmann, and I ask that it be appended to the record of this hearing. In the article of the Weekly Standard from last December, he describes Xinjiang's procedure, removal of organs by teams of surgeons in medical vans immediately after executions. One doctor told him that some of the transplants came from still living victims, and that comports with what we heard from witnesses back in 1998 and since. He said the stories point to systematic elimination of China's religious and political prisoners, and of course they're making huge profits doing that. Without objection, I would, since we were late in starting, ask that my full statement be made a part of the record. But again, Mr. Chairman, I thank you for pulling this hearing together because this barbaric human rights abuse must be stopped. But to stop it, we first have to further expose it, which is why we have this panel. Thank you.
Ms. Bass, thank you for being here. And Chris, thank you for being here. This hearing goes to the heart of what America is really all about. And if we don't care about things like this, what kind of country, what kind of people have we become? So thank you to all the witnesses for coming here and helping to expose this horrendous part of what's going on in the world today. What we're going to ask is each of the witnesses will have 5 minutes to summarize their position. If you have a longer statement, you can submit it for the record, and then we will follow that with the questions from the committee to you right after each one of you, after you all have finished your opening statements. So, Mr. Gutmann, you may proceed.
Beginning in 2006, I began conducting comprehensive interviews with medical professionals, Chinese law enforcement personnel, and over 50 refugees from the Laogai system in order to piece together the story of how mass harvesting from prisoners of conscience evolved in China. Based on my research, the practice began in Xinjiang in the 1990s. By 2001, the practice expanded nationwide, with Falun Gong providing a much larger and frequently anonymous pool of potential donors. My time today is very short. I, too, was skeptical when I began my investigation. Some of you may be today. So instead of offering my conclusions, I invite you to draw your own conclusions from my evidence, 12 witnesses, each of whom fills in a critical piece of the puzzle. Harry Wu's research shows that harvesting criminals began in the 1980s. By the early 1990s, it had become systemic, a practice involving organ donation consent forms and mobile organ harvesting vans at execution sites. These donors were criminals. Whether or not the criminals signed the forms under duress, they had been convicted of capital crimes under Chinese law. Now, my first witness, Nijat Abdurrahmu, Special Officer, 1st Regiment, Urumqi Public Security Bureau, doesn't dispute that, but he does note that by 1994, the doctors doing the harvesting had become increasingly uninhibited. A fellow officer puzzled over the screams, like from hell, that he heard coming from a harvesting van. 2 years later, the prison's medical director confessed to Nijati that organ harvesting from living human beings, they would expire during the surgery, of course, was now routine. My second witness, Dr. Enver Totti, general surgeon based in Urumqi Hospital, under his supervisor's firm direction, Enver performed a live surgical extraction of the man's livers and kidneys on an execution ground. This execution ground was commonly used for political prisoners. The man had long hair rather than a convict's shaved head. But there are no fully credible allegations of doctors harvesting political or religious prisoners until 1997, the year of the Gulja incident. My third witness, a nurse who worked in a Gulja hospital in 1997, describes the hospital being turned upside down, arrest of any doctor who dared to treat a Uyghur protester, the segregation of Uyghur medical staff, Chinese doctors administering slow-acting lethal injections to any Uyghur baby who had the misfortune of being born a second child. Finally, she describes 6 months after the Gulja incident, the case of a 21-year-old Uyghur protester harvested for his kidneys by a Chinese military hospital. This timing jibes with my fourth witness, a young doctor ordered to blood test prisoners in the political wing of an Urumqi prisoner on behalf of 6 highly placed party officials in search of healthy organs. The next 8 witnesses, and I'm going to skip their names for the brevity, come from different backgrounds, were held as prisoners in strikingly different facilities. Yet they all had 2 things in common. They're all practitioners of Falun Gong, and they were all given strikingly similar medical exams. The doctor would draw a large volume of blood, then a chest x-ray, then a urine sample, probing of the abdomen, in most cases a close examination of the corneas. Did the doctor ask any of them to trace the movement of his light? Did he wiggle his fingers to check their peripheral vision? No, only the corneas, nothing involving brain function. The doctors were checking the retail organs and nothing else. Now, I defy the Chinese authorities to furnish a plausible explanation for such tests, or why these tests were given to thousands of Falun Gong men and women, particularly women, often matched with an individual guard to prevent any disruption. Why were there special buses arranged to take Falun Gong practitioners away after extensive blood testing? Or why, as time progressed, Eastern Lightning Christians or Tibetan activists were given the same exams? Now, I can't supply a death count for those groups, but I estimate that 65,000 Falun Gong were murdered for their organs from 2000 to 2008. Given my time limitations here, I request that you include my recent chapter in State Organs, which explicitly explains the methodology behind that number, along with 2 articles, China's Gruesome Organ Harvest and the Xinjiang Procedure, in the record of today's hearings. Anyone who reads this material will quickly grasp the obvious. The demand for the harvesting of political prisoners came not from triads, but aging party cadres. China is a surveillance state. It is aimed at observing party members and the military. Wang Lijun himself was given an award for medical innovation in organ harvesting, so Party Central knew about this. This was state-run, and any reader will quickly grasp why the Quit the Party movement cannot be a Reform the Party movement. Ultimately, my writing and my testimony cannot do justice to these 12 witnesses. But I can report one thing with certainty. Every one of these witnesses that I mentioned has consented to testify openly before this committee. Now, the fact is, these witnesses have begun to realize their strength in the collective narrative and end transparency, particularly in the West, and particular if the U.S. government facilitates this transparency. Sadly, little support has come forward in the 6 years since these first allegations have surfaced. Much more evidence has accumulated since that time, but our government has done little. So I believe a tragedy is being played out even in this hearing today. For in the final analysis, these witnesses are the men and women who should be sitting in this chair today, not me.
Thank you very much for that testimony. Dr. Lee, you may proceed.
Can I testify after these two doctors on my left, please? Because I think that make more sense.
That'll be just fine. Thank you.
Thank you.
Doctor, would you like to proceed?
Good afternoon, Honorable Chairman Rohrabacher, Mr. Smith, Ms. Bass, members of Congress, congressional staff, and guests. I'm Gabriel Danovitch. I'm a professor of medicine at UCLA. I'm also the secretary of the International Transplantation Society, which is the NGO for the WHO for matters of transplantation. And TTS and the International Society of Nephrology are co-sponsors of the Declaration of Istanbul on organ trafficking and transplant tourism, a declaration that has been endorsed by over 100 governments and professional organizations around the world, and which works to put an end to the exploitation of vulnerable organ donors around the world and to put a stop to the use of organs from executed prisoners in China. Let me say categorically that the recovery of organs from transplantation from executed prisoners is regarded internationally as an unacceptable abrogation of human rights. The Chinese Ministry of Health has also said so repeatedly that it is not consistent with international standards, yet it continues. There may be doubts about the number, but there can be no doubts about the Chinese own numbers. You can look up on the Chinese Ministry of Health own website, CLTR, the China Liver Transplant Registry, which as of August 2012, that is last month, gives over 21,000 executed prisoners for liver transplant. The numbers may be considerably more than that, but they're unlikely to be less than the Chinese government's own statistics. There was some drop-off in these numbers towards at the time of the Olympic Games in China in 2008 under the influence of Congress, but since that time those numbers seem to be increasing. The ease in which these organs can be obtained and the manner that they may be allocated to wealthy foreigners has engendered a culture of corruption, which also affects living donation, where vending is rampant. Despite Chinese laws, there are Chinese laws to this effect, which are often flouted, and statements by the Ministry of Health admit that their own laws are flouted. These Chinese organ recovery practices have wide implications beyond China. China has become a hub for wealthy foreigners seeking quick access to organs, and in doing so, this has undermined the development of organ recovery in other countries. I include Americans who travel to China and other countries to purchase organs in numbers that we do not know, and I'll come back to that in a moment, why that is an important job for this group. The medical outcome for recipients of these organs is often poor, both from executed prisoners and from vended donors. U.S. citizens returning from China and from other countries that have been involved in organ vending often do so with life-threatening medical complications requiring prolonged hospital care, high mortality rate, and significant public health risks. I have observed this personally in my own practice at the UCLA Ronald Reagan Medical Center and have published in this matter. On the positive side, attempts are being made by the Chinese Ministry of Health to develop alternative organ recovery practices that are consistent with international standards. The TTS, the Transplantation Society, and the Istanbul Group is actively engaged in trying to support the activities. With respect to the United States, this country has recently improved its public transparency and accountability regarding non-residents coming to the United States for transplants. However, there is no transparency or reliable information on U.S. citizens that travel to China and elsewhere despite the medical risk and public health implication and tremendous cost involved in that. We just do not know. There's no information on that. Organ vending does not only occur in China. The WHO has identified several hotspots in developing countries around the world. Organ vending in this country remains illegal according to NOTA, the National Organ Act, yet it is not illegal for United States citizens to engage in vending abroad. U.S. should take the lead in this regard in stopping its citizens from going abroad to break the laws in other countries. Other countries have passed such laws. The TTS, the Transplantation Society, and the DICG has made and will continue to make efforts to deny academic recognition to those whose practice is contrary to its ethical standards. We also are attempting to influence the behavior of pharmaceutical companies. It is hard for us to control what goes on in China, but we do have some control about what goes on in this country and how we affect the behavior of Americans. It's not enough for us to express abhorrence of this practice. Congress can tell Americans not to go to China or elsewhere to purchase organs from the living or the dead. We can do that. The U.S. should prohibit citizens from contravening organ transplant laws in other countries and should work to achieve international consensus. The National Organ Transplantation Act, NOTA, of which we are rightly proud in this country, should be given extraterritorial jurisdiction. All U.S. residents returning to this country after receiving an organ transplant performed legally or illegally in another country should be required to declare this fact on their return. Such a policy would permit transparency and protect public health. U.S. visa DS-160 now is a small step in that direction. You know, when you fill in your customs form when you come into the United States, you say whether or not you've been on a farm or you're bringing in nuts, but you don't have to say whether or not you purchased an organ in another country. U.S. companies should be prohibited from undertaking organ transplant-related clinical activities or benefiting from the sale of equipment or pharmaceuticals if the source of organs is executed prisoners or commercial organ donation, and we have tried to make some progress with pharmaceutical companies in that regard. Human trafficking for organ removal, which occurs not only in China, but in other countries in the world, should be added to the Trafficking Victim Protections Act, TVPA. The U.S. Organ and Procurement and Transplant Network, which is a branch of the DHHS around the corner from here, has accepted the definitions of the Declaration of Istanbul, and UNOS has accepted, which is the organization which governs transplantation in the United States, has accepted the principles of this declaration. Several governments now include the declaration in their transplant regulations. The U.S. government and the State Department should promote the principles of the Declaration of Istanbul and the World Health Assembly, whose guiding principles now cover these principles. Through its good offices in China and elsewhere, the U.S. government and State Department should make it clear that the use of organs from executed prisoners and the buying and selling of organs from the living and the dead around the world is an unacceptable abrogation of human rights. And the U.S. should be prepared to offer the Chinese authorities assistance in the development of alternative, ethically acceptable organ retrieval practices. And the U.S. professional transplant community is at the ready to help in that regard. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Noto.
Thank you for allowing me to come to speak today on such an important topic. I am a spokesperson for an organization called Doctors Against Forced Organ Harvesting, and my purpose here today is to try and convey to you the information we've learned over the past decade. Since the 1990s, evidence had continued to mount which concerned the medical community that Chinese transplant practices were just completely unethical. And this goes back to what he mentioned before in 1998, when a prison guard testified here. And then in 2001, a Chinese medical doctor named Wang Guoji fled to the United States, testified in front of Congress that China was using organs from executed prisoners. This was something the Chinese Communist Party at the time completely denied. Many doctors then started becoming very alarmed at the rapid exponential increase in transplantations that were taking place in China since 1999. And then the number of transplant centers just took off. China's transplant centers went from 150 in 1999 to over 600 by early 2000. And according to Chinese Vice Minister of Health, the number of transplants performed each year went from several hundred in 1999 to well over 10,000 a year by 2008. And the China Daily newspaper reported that the actual number in 2006 was 20,000. And now it is widely recognized that China performs the second most amount of transplantations, only second to the United States. Even more troublesome is evidence that China seemed to have an overabundance of organs and that their medical tourism business was booming. They had hospitals advertising all over the internet that they could guarantee patients organs within the time frame of weeks, and they could even schedule them in advance. To put that in perspective, the United States waiting time for a kidney is over 3 years. It became apparent that China's organ harvesting was an extremely profitable business, with the Chinese medical centers often saying that their number one source of revenue was their transplant unit, and that on their websites they were saying they were charging $30,000 for a cornea, $60,000 for a kidney, $150,000 for a heart. Imagine what one person was worth in the hundreds of thousands. Some people may think, it makes sense. China is such a large country, so many people. But you really need to take a few factors into consideration. One, China does not have a formal public organ donation program. And two, they have no organized national distribution system. And even though they tried many times, the Beijing Red Cross themselves stated in 2011 that over the past 20 years, only 37 people nationwide had registered to become an organ donor. Take that in comparison to the United Kingdom, who has 18 million people as registered donors. Many people believe this is because the Chinese people have very strong spiritual belief that they need to be buried with their organs intact. So the question becomes, how has China become the number 2 transplant country in the world, and where are these organs coming from? Well, in 2005, the Vice Minister of Health of China admitted that over 95% of the organs transplanted come from executed prisoners. And then in 2010, he stated again that between 1997 and 2008, China had performed more than 100,000 transplantations, and over 90% of the organs came from executed prisoners. This is China saying that themselves. Although the Chinese government admits the major source of organs is from executed prisoners, they don't actually give official numbers for either the amount of people they execute every year or the amount of people they transplant every year. If you look at many experts, they try to estimate it. It's anywhere from about 2,000 to 8,000 executions a year takes place in China, which is more than all the world combined. But that still falls short of the 10,000 organs that they're saying they're transplanting every year. So the numbers don't add up. Even if they executed 10,000 a year and transplanted 10,000 a year, there would still be a very large discrepancy. Why is that? It's simply impossible that those 10,000 people executed would match perfectly the 10,000 people that needed the organs. You really have so many factors that go into play when you're transplanting somebody. And many times we'll use the ratio of 10 to 1. It takes 10 people to find a suitable donor for one person. So if we go by those numbers, they couldn't be just executing 10,000 people. Doing it the way they say they're doing, they'd have to be executing around at least 100,000 people. Then there's the factor of time, which needs to be really understood. Once you harvest someone's organs, it's not that you can keep these organs around forever. There's a very short window of time. Take, for example, a heart, which only has about 8 hours once removed from the body. And you have the fact that China's own state laws says that prisoners, once sentenced to execution, have to be executed within 7 days. And this almost happens automatically. So we don't have the situation in China where we have all these people on death row. It's just not like that. And this is So saying this means that the prisoners sentenced to death cannot fully account for all the transplantations that are taking place in China, especially when we talk about medical tourism patients. So how are they able to have this quote-unquote on-demand transplant system that's capable of extremely short times? The only way they can be doing this is if they have another source of living donors that are available on demand. And I say living donors. And this is where, in some cases, the actual transplant operation itself becomes the method of execution. It has been through many different investigations that we now come to believe that it's prisoners of conscience, including Falun Gong practitioners, Tibetans, Uyghurs, house Christians, who are being killed for their organs. And many of us now believe that the practitioners of Falun Gong may be one of the worst victims because they comprise by many, or believed by many, to be the largest population of prisoners of conscience in China today. Also, if you look at the timeline of the onset of China's boom in transplantations and the onset of the persecution of Falun Gong, it almost runs in complete parallel, with both of them starting in 1999. Plus, you have the fact that Falun Gong practitioners become particularly vulnerable because they often don't give their true identities while in prison to protect their family and loved ones. We also know that they're subjected to tests like blood and urine tests, physical exams, ultrasound evaluations multiple times while they're incarcerated. How can all this be possible? Well, China has a very unique situation where the military controls the prison systems, the forced labor camps, and the majority of hospitals performing these transplantations. Therefore, they're able to do all the coordinating to make it possible, and they have the ability to do it secretively. So where does this put us? Well, we have American doctors, we have American hospitals, we have American universities facing an extremely important dilemma, and we have a place where American doctors need to know what's going on. Currently, we have physicians, like Dr. Danovitch just said, have their patients going to China for organs. We have our own hospitals training these transplant surgeons from China. We have our universities participating and funding research in China on transplantation. We have our certain well-known pharmaceutical companies selling the transplant medications needed to do the transplants and even funding clinical trials in China to develop new ones. If we look at the numbers, every day there's a few dozen people being killed for their organs. And if we wait another 5 years, as the Chinese Medical Association has said it's going to take to stop this, there's a possibility of another 50,000 innocent lives that will be taken. I stand before you today hoping that the U.S. government will perform an official investigation into this matter and release all evidence it has about China's transplant practices. How can we expect our doctors and hospitals to make good decisions without all the information? In fact, our medical community could become accomplices to this horrible, terrific tragedy. I recommend also Congress pass a resolution condemning China's forced organ harvesting from prisoners and prisoners of conscience. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. Dr. Lee?
Thank you, Chairman, for distinguished members of the committees for giving me the opportunity to testify today. And I also want to thank the gentleman who just spoken about the organ harvesting. I myself was in prison in China for 3 years, and I forcibly had blood samples taken without being told the reasons. If it were not for my U.S. citizenship and the international support of people like those in this room, I could have been the victim of the organ harvesting as well. But I want to touch some points regarding the Chinese Communist Party, which may help us to understand better about this organ harvesting. The first thing is that the history of the killing by the CCP actually, starting the communist movement actually has caused 150 million people worldwide died, including 80 million people in China. There was one thing worth mentioning is that there was a big famine, man-made famine, during the year of 1959 to 1961. 40 million people starved to death in China. And what is more bizarre is that those starved people were not allowed to go out to beg. The armed forces locked them inside the villages. So, most recently, they started the persecution of Falun Gong practitioners in 1999. We have 3599 deaths were documented with names and address and how they were torture tested. But as this gentleman said, there's estimated 65,000 people were killed for their organs. Then, such inconceivable deeds go beyond the routine suppression common to dictatorships, because the CCP is not just the average authoritarian regime. If you look at the history of the origin and their philosophy, and then we can find out that it is very evident that CCP is particularly malicious, inhumane, and nefarious. In other words, it's evil. It has been like this since its very origin. Even though very few people in China right now believe in communism, but their fundamental attributes like atheism and struggle continue to underpin the CCP's actions. And having destroyed traditional Chinese values like compassion, integrity, and respect for the divine that stabilized China for thousands of years, the CCP and its officials lack a moral baseline. Because of this absence of moral baseline, the Chinese officials, communist officials, judges, and even doctors, they can participate or condone heinous crimes like organ harvesting. Then the second point I want to mention is that there is a movement called quitting the Communist Party. It's also called Tuidang in Chinese. There was a book called 9 Commentaries on Communist Party was published at the end of 2004. This book describes the true nature of the Communist Party, and it's called the Chinese Communist Party is the evil specter. And also Karl Marx, actually, he himself referred to the communism as a specter in his Communist Manifesto. The book actually spread wide, like in China, like wildfire, and it started arguably the world's largest grassroots human rights movement of our days started. The first Tuidang movement actually was received by the Epoch Times in December 2004, and then the month next, the paper published a solemn declaration urging whoever had joined the CCP or its affiliate organizations to quit immediately and erase the stain on their conscience left by the CCP specter in order to definitely break from the party and avoid suffering for future retributions upon the CCP's demise. And then, there was a website built out just for that. With the help of Falun Gong practitioners inside China and abroad, this Tuidang movement has grown stronger and faster with today. Right now, we have over 123 million people renounced the association with the Communist Party and affiliate organizations. Every day, there are over 70,000 people doing this. The Falun Gong activists involved in Tuidang movement seek to promote the movement, not to catalyze the regime change, but to offer Chinese citizens a chance to understand the CCP's history of violence and take a principled stand. By choosing to no longer associate with it, and indeed, actually, spiritual movement, spiritual meaning is fundamental to. When we review these Tuidang movement statements, it is very quickly evident that people overwhelmingly frame their decision to withdraw from the party in moral and spiritual terms. The Tuidang movement is actually helping China to prepare for the post-CCP future. Right now, inside China, there are like 180,000 massive incidents every year. This is like saying like 500 daily protests against the CCP's suppression. And there's one paper published by the Min Xin Pei, in Foreign Policies. He asked questions: are we obsessing about China's rise when we should be worried about its fall? So the Tuidang movement does not prescribe the specific institutional reforms for a post-CCP China, but it does provide a way out of the moral crisis. It offers hope for China as tens of millions of people not only reject the party's culture of violence, lies, and struggles, but also embrace truth and integrity and free their conscience. So what should the U.S. government do then? The simple answer is to stand together with the people of China rather than with the CCP regime. So I would like to stop here and just take more questions, because there are a lot of things to cover if I had more time. Thank you very much again for giving me this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you for that testimony, and thank all of the witnesses. I understand Mr. Smith has another commitment, so what we'd like to do is I'm going to permit, why don't you go first, and then I'll I'll ask the questions I have.
Thank you, Dana. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really do appreciate it. First of all, your testimonies are extraordinary, incisive, filled with information that is actionable, and I hope that the administration, as well as the Congress, does more. I think, Dr. Danovitch, your suggestion that we amend the National Organ Transplant Act of 1984 is a good one. We're going to scope out doing a bill. I think it's a great idea. Just like sex tourism is criminalized and you can't go anywhere in the world and think if you're in Brazil abusing a little child, you evade U.S. law, the same ought to hold true here. And I think thank you for that very important recommendation. I guess a few basic questions. Mention was made about Dr. or Manfred Nowak. I've read his report, the Special Rapporteur on Torture, and it was striking that he didn't get to talk to death row prisoners. I'm wondering if he made any conclusions or has spoken out, he's not the Special Rapporteur on Torture anymore, about the organ issue. Did he understand, did any of the UN bodies, frankly, not just this specialist on torture, but the UN Human Rights Council, the Torture Convention, which has a panel of experts, has anybody weighed in and said what you're doing to individuals through execution, especially the Falun Gong, is barbaric and must stop? Yes, please. Dr. Noto.
Yeah, Manfred Nowak himself actually stood up and in front of the United Nations said he believed that Falun Gong practitioners were being executed for their organs, and he had said at that time he's hoping this practice would stop immediately. So he was actually a very, very big believer. That's great.
Did the UN do anything in follow-up, and did the U.S.
As far
government
as
do
I
anything
know,
in follow-up?
no.
You mentioned, Mr. Gutmann, that our government has done little. What do you think the Obama administration should be doing?
I think you need a dual-track approach in this, in the sense that on one side you need to pressure corporations. We don't really have any laws forbidding companies from doing, say, what Roche is doing, the pharmaceutical company of Switzerland. They are doing testing of transplant patients on the mainland currently, clinical testing. And similarly, Isotechnica Pharma of Canada is also doing that for profit on the Chinese mainland. These are transplant patients who obviously could well be carrying Falun Gong organs, Uyghur organs, and so forth. There's a problem there. TFP Ryder Healthcare of the UK is trying to build a medical center, including a transplant center inside Dalian, which was the epicenter of Falun Gong organ harvesting, according to every witness I spoke to. So I'm not sure exactly what the mechanism that you'd use for that to inhibit this kind of thing, but I think the Chinese listen to this kind of stuff very closely. The Chinese leadership care about money. They care about investment very, very much. The second thing is that by doing this, you would strengthen the reformers inside China. If Wen Jiabao indeed does have some sort of plan to come clean about this, you would at least, let's find out. Let's find out by putting him on the spot. But the second prong to that, the second part of the attack, is to bring these witnesses forward, because by putting these witnesses on this kind of stand and putting them through the kind of cross-examination that only Congress can do, we would also strengthen those reformers in China, and we would prevent what exactly is happening now, which is this attempt to bury the whole issue, to say, okay, within 3 to 5 years, this whole issue is going to be gone, and we'll never have to look at it again.
Well, again, I would note for the record that we did have a series of hearings in the 90s and beyond, and we never seemed to get anywhere with the Chinese government even acknowledging it. So some of the acknowledgments of recent vintage certainly shows that they're aware, and maybe they're so brazen and arrogant now, they feel they can say it, and who cares? Let me ask you, years ago I read a book about Unit 731, operating in China by the Japanese, did horrific experimentation on a number of people, especially upon Chinese. I find it appalling that the Chinese government could countenance this kind of torture when it sings out, as it does, and complains to this day about the abuses committed by the Japanese by way of torture, especially Unit 731. And if I could, final, because I'm running out of time, Dr. Danovitch, You mentioned that I believe it was you, it's been well documented that medical outcomes for such transplants are poor. I wonder if you might tell us why, because if you can dry up demand, or if just by talking about how, they don't do it state-of-the-art wise, it might come at it at a different level. So, okay, Dr. Danovitch.
Can I answer you?
Yes, please.
Yes, unethical medicine tends to be bad medicine.
Yeah.
If you care only about the money and not about the outcome, medicine tends to be bad. So there are several reasons why. The most common reason are infectious complications. In fact, the Chinese Ministry of Health has itself admitted that there are high incidence of infectious complications in people who undergo a vended vended transplantation around the world, by the way, not just in China. That's been reported elsewhere, and in transplants from executed prisoners. And I, in my own practice at UCLA, have seen people arrive at LAX with vicious infections and be admitted to the hospital sometimes for weeks and months. Also, when livers are recovered from executed prisoners, for technical reasons I won't go into now, often complications occur 3 or 4 weeks later. That is, when Americans go to China, get a liver from an executed prisoner, and return, there are specific complications in the biliary tract that occur late because of the mechanism of recovery, that then those patients end up spending months sometimes in U.S. hospitals suffering those complications. It's very dangerous.
Thank you very much. And I guess I will proceed. And if you've been joined by Congressman Turner from New York, and if after my questions you have any questions to ask or an opening statement, we'll be happy to accommodate you at that time. Okay. Let me just ask some specific things to make, just so I'll get this on the record. We have Radio Free Asia and Voice of America and other organizations that are supposed to be representing the values of the American people. Have they been playing a positive or negative role in this whole issue of forced organ harvesting? Have there been interviews of the Voice of America? Have any of you been interviewed with the Voice of America or Radio Free Asia, and what kind of role are they playing? No, nobody's been interviewed.
Can I take a shot at that?
Please do.
There is a long-standing taboo in the journalism community about Falun Gong, about this issue. To touch this issue is the third rail of journalism. If you touch it, if you are in Beijing, if you are based in China, you will not be given access to top leaders anymore. I can give you an example of this. I had a friend who wrote for the South China Morning Post. He wrote a very powerful article about Falun Gong back in the early days. The South China Morning Post was blocked. The web version was blocked in China for 6 months. That was at a time when South China Morning Post was desperately trying to get penetration of that market. This is common. And so there are many dangers to doing this for journalists, and I believe those extend across the board.
Not just journalists in general. I'm talking about now Radio Free Asia and Voice of America. Is that included in? Have any of you been interviewed on this issue, on either one of these?
I've never personally. I believe there was one Radio Free Asia interview, but I don't remember who it was on. That was positive.
So I know this never happens, but we have our journalists here. Is there a Radio Free Asia or Voice of America journalist with us today? Have you conducted any interviews on this issue before? All right, well, we're going to put you under oath and get you over here now. I think this is very significant. I mean, this is tantamount to one of the most heinous and ghoulish crimes that has been going on this planet for the last 20 years, and yet the outlets that are supposed to be representing American values haven't bothered to do a story on it. I think that this is very significant, and I think it maybe sends an unfortunate message to other journalists throughout the world, and perhaps it sends the message that maybe Americans don't care. Maybe this is just a small group of troublemakers who are trying to cause a problem on this issue. So, no, none of you have been. I think I'll send a letter to Voice of America and Radio Free Asia to find out why this hasn't been covered as it should. Now, have the governments of South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, have these governments acknowledged China's forced organ harvesting program? What are the policies of those governments? Or are they just looking the other way?
I can't answer for those countries. I can say that Malaysia now, where 75% of Malaysians go to China to get organs, have now introduced rules to hopefully diminish that. The Israelis now have laws that don't permit their insurance companies to pay for transplantation if those transplants are illegal elsewhere. That's a rule that could well be adopted by other countries. I can't answer for Taiwan and the other Asian countries that you mentioned.
Anything in Japan, Korea?
As far as I know, Japanese and Koreans still go to China for organs. I don't know specific. I can't give you specific numbers.
Dr. Noto?
I can't speak for those countries, but I can speak for Australia, who passed a law that stops the training of Chinese transplant surgeons in Australia. If they come to Australia, they need to sign a contract that says they won't participate in forced organ harvesting. And from what I've heard from physicians there, it's basically stopped Chinese doctors from coming to be trained in Australia.
All of this reflects a dehumanization of values, and I know there's some sort of art exhibit, plasticization or something like that. Do we have any evidence that those? I mean, they're apparently made out of real bodies. Is there any indication that these are the bodies of religious prisoners or political prisoners?
I can speak. There is one association where the companies that were doing these plasticizations was in Liaoning province. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correct, but that's where Wang Lijun, the police officer who came to the U.S. Embassy for asylum, he had stated that he had done thousands of transplants, surgeries, and experiments in that same province around the same time that this company you're mentioning with the plasticization took off. So we think that there is a possibility some of these bodies did wind up there.
Again, that is a reflection that such a monstrous thing can be looked at as art, and this reflects a degeneration of values. The Chinese Vice Minister of Health said earlier this year that within 5 years that the PRC would stop organ harvesting of prisoners. I think it's been commented on a little bit here. Maybe we can come down just officially one by one. Do you take that seriously, and do you think that this will indeed be phased out? Just right down the line.
The sequence of events here is very interesting. I mean, Wang Lijun made his break for the Chengdu consulate. Shortly after that, the words live organ harvest were available on Baidu, the search engine. Okay, this is after some back and forth. This is in the middle of the crisis. They've never been allowed before. It was a brief period where you could search those terms in China. It was a kind of brinksmanship, as we can see it. This is followed a few days later by the announcement out of the blue in a kind of case of mentionitis that they are going to stop the organ harvesting of all criminals within 3 to 5 years. Not criminals of conscience, that's not mentioned, of course. Nobody mentioned it. The Wall Street Journal didn't mention it. The Washington Post didn't mention it. Nobody brought up that issue. Again, the taboo held. But the point is, clearly, if you look at that sequence of events, coming in the middle of one of the worst leadership crises China's had in years, this is playing a major issue. Now, for once, I don't always agree with Falun Gong analysts, but I have to here. This is clearly organ harvesting, and the organ harvesting of Falun Gong in particular is playing a major role as a political football in this Chinese leadership transition.
So you're, so you're optimistic that this could be a signal that something real is going to happen?
I'm optimistic in that sense, but I don't, you know, as much as I think a terribly heinous crime has been committed and may well still be committed, I don't think the leadership has shown any sign of reform whatsoever. I think they're preparing to bury this most recent mass murder just the same way that Tiananmen was buried, in the same way the Cultural Revolution was buried, in the same way the Great Leap Forward was buried.
I see. Dr. Li, are you optimistic that this Chinese Vice Minister of Health is speaking policy that will be actually implemented in the elimination of this heinous activity?
Yeah, I think, you know, looking at the true nature of the CCP, I do not count on them at all, because they you know, when this organ harvesting issue came out in 2006, and, you know, several months later, the Chinese health official says that they took the organs from the executed prisoners. The reason is to cover up, you know, the actions on Falun Gong practitioners. So when things happen, and then they took measures to trying to cover up, but they have been like sign agreements or make promise all their, you know, all these years, but a lot of times they just, you know, broke it. So that if you look in the future, you know, the only thing you can count is that the change within the China, that the regime has less and less control over the society. Things will change for the better, and hopefully that you know, Chinese people will live in the country without Communist Party. By that time, we can, you know, be more optimistic that you know, if the government promised something, we can count on that. Thank you.
I didn't quite understand your answer.
I'm so sorry.
Did
What I'm saying is that
Are
you
you
cannot count on them.
yeah,
They make promises, but they don't keep it at all.
Mr. Gutmann has some optimism. You have no optimism?
No optimism on them, but on the future, you know, overall. That's
Oh, yeah, well, we can all be positive about the future.
Yeah.
But I was thinking mainly the future based on the statement by the Chinese Vice Minister of Health. What about you?
Well, I'll try and be a realist. I've actually personally heard the Chinese Vice Minister of Health, Fu Wang, in an international forum admit that their behavior of the Chinese, the ongoing use of executed prisoners is an embarrassment to them. He admitted that international forum. That's quite something. I do believe that there are forces in China that generally want to see improvement. But I do also agree that they may not have full control, and there are also forces that enjoy the money chain and corruption that comes along with the ongoing abuse of executed prisoners and of vending. I think it is our job, since we can't control what goes on in China, what's our job in the United States is to do our best to make our absolute abhorrence.
You're giving me one of these on the other hand answers where they say, well, on the other hand, this. If you had to come down, are you an optimist?
I'm more optimistic now than I was several years ago.
Good. Dr. Noto.
I'm not very optimistic. If history teaches us anything, they've told us twice before the Chinese Medical Association said they would stop. Both in 2001 and 2007, they said they would stop. Again, this year, they keep saying it's still happening. So if we go by their word, I have very little faith. Plus, the Chinese Medical Association themselves has no power over the military, which we believe is playing a major role here. So they can say whatever they want, but if they can't get the military to take action, it's not going to stop.
All right. Now, and how many Falun Gong practitioners have had their organs harvested, and how many political prisoners, et cetera, and how Tibetans, Uyghurs? How many are we talking about? I heard the number 65,000 victims over a few-year period. What are we talking about here?
A number I come up with, and it's estimate with a huge range possibility in there. It's based on a survey method of 65,000 over an 8-year period, essentially.
Okay. You have Dr. Lee, do you have another estimate? Dr. Danovitch?
No, but I can just give you the Chinese liver transplant registry. The Ministry of Health own registry give a number of 21,000 liver transplants from executed prisoners up until August of this year. That's likely to be a minimal number, but that's a lot.
And we also heard that to get that number of organs transplanted, you have to have 100,000 perhaps operations to
I'm not sure that's correct.
achieve that. Well, let's, yeah. Dr. Noto, what do you estimate?
After looking at everybody's different investigations, I would put the number at least at 50,000.
Okay. This is obviously what we're talking about is a monstrous crime. To tear open the body of someone who has been incarcerated for any reason is very questionable. I mean, it's, even if the person's a murderer, if someone has ripped open the body of someone else and killed them. But to rip open the body of someone who is simply involved in a religious or personal or political idea that is contrary to the wishes of the ruling elite, and to rip a body open of someone like that, especially if that person's religious or political beliefs are pacifistic and not a physical threat to the regime. This is about the most monstrous crime that I can conceive of. And yet, the Voice of America and Radio Free Asia haven't done any stories about it. Yet we have major journalists in this country and countries throughout the West who have not done stories about this. Shame on our journalist community. I'm a former journalist. That's how I earned my living before I went into politics. Shame. There are many people who were being slaughtered during the Second World War, not just the Jews by the Nazis, but many different peoples. And that slaughter was quite often just ignored. And this is the fact that we are having a hearing today is an attempt to try to encourage a look at this issue and for the American people and other peoples to hear about this so that perhaps with a loud voice we can state together that decent people do not put up with this type of activity in their country, nor should they allow their fellow countrymen to purchase the organs of people who are being subjugated to this ghoulish, horrible, criminal behavior against them. I appreciated the exact, the specific suggestions that have been made here. We will study those suggestions. Mr. Turner, do you have a statement or question you'd like to ask?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one question. Do we know the number of foreign nationals on an annual basis that travel to China as patients? Do we have an estimate, perhaps?
No, we don't, and that's an extraordinary fact. We do know about people coming into this country to get organs, but we don't know how many people go outside. I don't think the numbers are very large, but we don't know those numbers, and we certainly should, not just from the ethical point of view, from the medical, public health, and cost point of view. No, we don't. There's no documentation.
Do we have any?
You can get the data in a kind of background way by looking about people who are in Medicare and whether they get medications afterwards, but it's very, very indirect. We have no precise numbers.
And do we know if any of this is done on demand? That is, someone on the internet contacts the Chinese, I need a liver, 2 weeks, and say, well, it might take us 3, but we'll find one.
Well, I had a specific patient of mine who went to China despite my request that she not do so, and basically got a kidney more or less on demand. I have a colleague in Israel who had a patient had a heart transplant at a given date, which means someone must have been executed for that very purpose, and it's well known that that happens. There are proliferation of internet sites that are looking for foreigners to come to China to get organs from executed prisoners, contrary to Chinese law. The Chinese do have laws, but those laws are often flouted and ignored.
And are these operations all run by military units?
Not necessarily. Some are by military units, and some are in
Political?
so-called academic centers.
Yes, sir.
Can I just mention something? There is a doctor, a surgeon in Taiwan who I spoke to in a reasonably confidential manner, who initially was very standoffish, but then he revealed to me that he had been taking his patients over to the mainland for a long time to receive organs, to get new kidneys and livers and so on, aging patients. And he had negotiated for the Chinese price, not to pay the foreigner price, pay the Chinese price. And so he'd gotten to know these doctors very well in the karaoke bars and all the stuff that you do when you negotiate in China. At the end of this negotiation period, they said, hey, you know what, we're not only going to give you the Chinese price, but you're getting the best of the best. You're getting all Falun Gong organs. Now, this man is a top surgeon in Taiwan. He's an incredibly credible witness. If your committee were to call him, it is possible that he would testify to this. And I think he could explain a lot about this business. He was basically doing it right up till the Olympics. So we would have some fairly reasonably current information on this. And I think he's quite credible.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to adjourn in a moment, and let me just note that organ transplanting in and of itself is not evil. Organ transplanting in and of itself, we should, I certainly think that we should encourage people in this country to participate in organ donating if they are in a car accident or something like that. I think that is something that is a laudatory and speaks well of people who are involved in organ transplanting in that way. But what we have focused on today is an evil manifestation of something that is good, that has been perverted into being something that's probably one of the most evil activities on this planet today. And that is taking people who are being incarcerated for their political beliefs or their religious beliefs, people who are in no way engaged in a violent activity against any other human being, and murdering them, and is in the process of stealing their body organs. This is a crime against humanity. We should do our best to identify those specific individuals who are engaged in this and put them on the list of people who deserve to be brought to justice. And specifically, that does not exclude Americans who are willing accomplices to this crime against humanity. We will have further discussions on this as time goes on, and hopefully next year we will be able, in the next session, be able to have a hearing and call to task some of the Americans who are engaged in this activity, at least as accomplices to this crime. I want to thank each of our witnesses for coming today. Thank you, Mr. Turner. This hearing is now adjourned.